All right, for those who are entering, just want to let you all know that we're going to give it about 1 minute to let other folks join us. Okay, it looks like a few more folks are trickling in, so we're going to give it just maybe 1 more minute. Okay, going to go ahead and get started. Hello, welcome to the Center of Excellence for Infant and Early Childhood Mental Health Consultations Conference, Equity from the Start. My name is Jennifer Drake Croft, and I will serve as your session moderator. I am joined by Ashley James, who will serve as our technical host. This session is being recorded and transcription is available through the Zoom platform. Should you have any questions, please feel free to relay those questions in the chat. We will have time at the end of the session for questions and answers with the presenters. That said, I'd like to pass it over to Dr. Maite Schenker, Dr. Eva Shiver, and Imperatriz, I'm sorry, I said it wrong, Imperatriz Guzman. I am sorry. I got it right in the earlier parts, and now I can't get it right, y'all. Sorry about that. So they're going to be conducting a workshop called Going Deeper to Increase Self-Awareness and Culturally Responsive Practices. So thank you all so much, and I'll be moderating questions at the end.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. Thank you everyone for being here. Good afternoon. My name is Maite Schenker. I'm a clinical psychologist at the University of Miami, faculty there, and also clinical director of the Jumpstart program. With me today, I have Emperatriz Guzman, who is one of our lead consultants from the team, as well as Dr. Eva Shiver from the Indigo Cultural Center, who's been helping us a great deal in our DEI efforts. Today, we are going to spend a little bit of time letting you know about our Jumpstart program, the different components, but we're going to spend most of our time talking about our program's efforts to increase self-awareness and cultural humility among the Jumpstart consultants. And hopefully we'll also have a little bit of time to reflect on the benefits of this equity training model and the impact that this can have on the clients that we serve. I'm going to start with just a little history of our Jumpstart program. We've been in existence for about 13 years. It started back in 2010 with a more traditional consultation model that was more coaching, more focused on a referral for a particular child that may be having some behavioral concerns, and the consultant would meet with the teacher to address those concerns. Back in 2018, we switched to the current model that we have now, which is following the Georgetown model. In this model, we follow a 3-level of consultation, which I'm going to go into a little bit more detail in my next slide. We serve about 100 centers per year, and we stay at each center for about 6 to 10 months. We're funded by a grant from the Children's Trust, which is a local funder. And our program is very reflective in nature, so we don't present ourselves as the experts, and so in that sense, it's a very different model from how it was at the beginning. From our Jumpstart program, which is still in existence, we had an offshoot, the Jumpstart Plus COVID support that came about as a result of the needs that emerged during COVID. At that time, we couldn't go into the centers in person, and so one of our faculty, Dr. Ruby Natali, wrote a grant for and got funding from NIH to conduct this study, which is an adaptation of our model, but using Kubi robots to provide the services remotely. And it's a lot more structured, a lot more short term, but we're working on it, and it's not something that I'm going to be focusing on today, but I just wanted to let you know that was also part of what we're working on. The Jumpstart program, our goals were to improve children's mental health, children's behavior and social emotional needs, and to reduce expulsions from childcare center, which is, as many of you probably know, is a big problem, not just in the Miami community, but all across the country. We follow 4 main pillars that we keep in mind as we do our work. One is safety. As you can imagine, during COVID, that was a big concern, but we address safety at a much broader term, not just for things related to the transmission of diseases or things like that, but also other aspects of safety and emergency situations. Another one of our pillars is communication. We work a lot with both directors and teachers on not just communication with families, but also communication within the centers between teachers and directors and vice versa. Self-care is another pillar that became extremely important during COVID, but it continues to be very important and something that we address with everyone that we work with. And then the last pillar is behavioral support, which, as you can imagine, is the main reason why a lot of the teachers and directors want us in their centers to help them address challenging behaviors. These are the 3 consultation services that we provide following the Georgetown model. The programmatic focuses on working primarily with the directors of the center or the owner of the center. And oftentimes we work a lot on policy and procedures, not just the content of the policy and procedures. And again, we work very collaboratively. So we don't come in telling them what to include, but more we work together with them on what makes sense for them, for their program, and what's required of them. And then the other big important piece is, how are these policy and procedures communicated with families, communicated with the staff, the teachers, etc. And are they really following what's written, etc. We also work with directors on self-care, as well as communication, among other things. The second level of consultation that we do a lot of our work in is classroom level consultations. That's working with teachers. And at that level, you know, we pretty much cover the 4 pillars. At the start, we do an observation, an assessment that the consultants complete, and a self-assessment that the teachers complete. And as part of that, as the consultants and the teachers talk and review their assessment, they come up with an action plan and they identify which are the main points that they want to focus on working, where they see the greatest need. And then the final point is in terms of consultation, is the child level consultation. That's the smallest portion of our work. We don't accept very many cases of child level consultations, but we do accept a few, and those tend to be children that are at the highest risk of being expelled. Just to tell you a little bit about our program specifically, like as I mentioned before, we serve 100 centers per year. We have 24 consultants and 4 supervisors. Our consultants all have master's degrees, many of them in a mental health field, some in early childhood education or child development. We partner with 3 community agencies, Jewish Community Services, Family Central, and CHI. So there's, including the University of Miami, there's 4 agencies that we work together in this program. We spend about 10 months at each site. Usually during the summer months, we enroll new centers. By October, we usually begin our services. And we tend to begin to wrap up by May. But again, it's very individual. So if we meet our goals before then, we can certainly close the cases before. As I mentioned before, we follow a very reflective stance, consultative stance in our approach to our work. We believe that it's really important to have consultants who are very well trained. So we've invested a lot of our time and efforts into trainings. We provide reflective supervision for all of our consultants as well as supervisors. And our supervisors and consultants are also endorsed. And many of you may be familiar with endorsement. But I mean, I can go into more detail about that if anyone wants to know during the question and answer. And of course, the final piece here is we always felt that it was very, very important to provide services that were culturally responsive. And that's the main reason we're here today, to talk to you a little bit about our efforts. Miami is a very different city as far as demographics. So we wanted to share a little bit about that. Miami is one of the poorest cities in the US. Approximately 26% of the city's families with children under the age of 3 are at or below poverty. 75% of those living in Miami speak a language other than English, and 54% are foreign born. That's a really important statistics that I think really differentiate us from a lot of other countries, a lot of other cities in the country that may have even large percentage of, let's say, Hispanic population. What differentiates us is that there's a lot of first and second generation immigrants that are part of the population at large. 70% of children from diverse backgrounds demonstrate increased health disparities. Children spend the majority of their day in childcare. 70% of children birth to 5 attend some form of childcare, and only half of children in Miami-Dade County arrive to kindergarten school ready. Some statistics that are more not just specific to Miami, but at large that we keep in mind as in our efforts is the harsh discipline is used early, often and disproportionately on children of color and children with disabilities in the US. Early learning and education systems. We know that Black boys represent 19% of public school enrollments, but 45% of male preschool suspensions. And Black girls represent 20% of preschool enrollment, but 54% of female preschool suspensions. We know that some of the contributing factors are implicit bias, school climate, demographic and resources, teacher wellness, skills and support systems, as well as policies and implementation of policies. So all of the things that we're keeping in mind in our efforts. A critical factor that contributes and must be addressed is the influence of implicit bias on the disproportionate discipline of Black children, as well as other children of color and children with disabilities. Findings paint a picture of the dehumanization of Black children over time, where Black children are seen as bigger, older, and more aggressive, less innocent, and even less able to feel pain. Both Black and white teachers show implicit biases that affect Black children, though it may present differently. So for all of those reasons, this has been an important mission of ours to address these things. That's the reason why from the start, we wanted to have consultants who were culturally and linguistically representative of the population we serve. From the start, we've had many didactic trainings on these topics from national experts like Dr. Dana Crawford, Dr. Eva Shiver, and Kadisha Johnson from Georgetown. All have been part of the faculty who have done a lot of trainings for us. But we had noticed that I let you know that part of our quality assurance is we do fidelity checks where we have our consultants on a quarterly basis record sessions, and we supervisors and lead consultants review those sessions, following a form that we have, making sure that consultations are being done with fidelity. And one of the variables that we look at is culture, and whether culture is being addressed in those consultations. And what we were noticing is that in spite of all these didactic trainings that we were offering, people were not feeling comfortable oftentimes addressing these things in consultation. So we felt we needed to do more. And that's when we partnered with Eva and Khadija, and we started our current efforts. And we will tell you a lot more about that. But first, I would like to introduce Eva to tell us a little bit about the Indigo Cultural Center.
Oh, thanks, Maite. So I'll kind of pick up on the story. The story actually next starts with Khadija, because Khadija, I think you had been offering, I think maybe TA with the group. Somehow you knew the group already, right? And then you invited us in. And I don't know if you feel well enough to say a little bit about that.
I feel very well and welcomed enough to say about that, but you both said it well. I was able, through the Center of Excellence, through Georgetown, in that capacity, when Mate and Ruby and Empy and others reached out for technical assistance, specifically with the awareness that Mate just mentioned, that despite having a real emphasis on didactic training, circumscribed didactic trainings related to diversity, inclusion, how could equity be more a central aspect of the work that the consultants in Jumpstart were doing, that they felt like something was still missing the mark for their consultants. And so in that way, based on our previous partnerships, Eva really began to think about how ongoing kinds of efforts to develop champions within programs might be a match for Miami. And luckily you and Miami all gave us a chance to think about it together and start. So that was how we came together to partner.
Yeah. And so a little bit about Indigo. We've been really kind of, I would say, through the portal of our evaluation and research with infant and early childhood mental health consultation, we are understanding, the potential that mental health consultation has to reduce bias. And with some of our earlier findings in Arizona, it kind of started us on this track of really talking with consultants more and more. How do we more explicitly, with more confidence, with more grace, bring in these themes around equity into the day-to-day work? And so we've been doing, in addition to research and evaluation with a very strong social justice lens, we've also been doing trainings and consultation and a lot of policy work. We've worked with organizations around the country, and we've done work with leaders. And like Khadija just kind of alluded to, our goal really is to work ourselves out of a contract, meaning our goal is to really help build up the internal capacity for organizations to be doing this work themselves. And I noticed some of the participants here on this call, we've partnered with some of your agencies as well in that same way. And yet Khadija and I have a beautiful history of collaborating. And so we moved into working together with the Miami team. And next slide, please. And this is just a little bit about our framework. We, over the years have developed, mostly through lessons learned, a framework of how to work mostly with practitioners and supervisors and leaders, researchers in the field of infant and early childhood mental health. And so these are the different levels, but each of these levels has very specific strategies that are also borrowed highly from the larger field of healing justice, which is, as many of you know, an area that is constantly evolving, and we're learning more and more. New terms are constantly emerging. So our framework tries to keep up with some of those changes too. So our framework constantly evolves too, but the basic levels are there. It's not meant to be linear, but it is also really meant to highlight that there is an internal component to understanding how justice plays out in our work, how it plays out in early care and education settings, really in any setting. And so much of what we do is understanding who we are in the work and understanding how the systems also live inside of us. And from that place of understanding, then our work, our doing starts to look different and feel different over time. Okay, next slide, please. And some additional frameworks that inform our work, including the facilitation work that we do. It's critical race theory, somatic abolition, healing justice. Each of these have definitions which are really important. They're overlapping, but also really distinct. And I'm not going to go into the definitions today. We presented on some of these in some other sessions during this conference, and I would definitely invite you. I think that these sessions I think they're all being recorded. I think they'll be available to go through, but these definitions are important, and they definitely influence the kind of templates we use when we work with other or coaching, other small group facilitators to do this work. Okay, next slide. Oh, okay.
So,
yes.
So coming back a little bit to what we did at this point when we realized we needed to do more, and we started a collaboration with Eva and Khadija, we decided that we wanted to select equity champions from each of the 4 organizations that are part of Jumpstart. We made an announcement to all of our consultants about this. And we asked those who were interested in becoming equity champions for their organizations to apply. Each agency supervisor and administrator interviewed those that were interested and selected the most qualified applicant. We developed some questions that we wanted to make sure everyone covered. And then we selected 1 or 2 consultants per agency, depending on the size of their teams. We have some agencies that have larger teams, so they had 2 consultants that became equity champions. And then something that we felt was really important was for this additional work, the equity champions receive an annual stipend that it would be ongoing as long as the work continues. We decided to have monthly meetings with Eva and Khadija between the supervisors and equity champions, where it would be more like a process-oriented group, a group where we could go deeper into these conversations and not so didactic in nature. The champions then would lead monthly groups with the rest of the consultants from their respective agencies. That the decision to include the supervisors was something also that we debated, but ultimately we felt it was important to include the supervisors because the supervisors would be also providing reflective supervision to the teams, and these topics hopefully were going to continue to come up in supervision, so we wanted everyone to be on the same page. And yeah, and then ultimately the goal is for the consultant in the parallel process for the consultants to have deeper discussions with directors and teachers and have an impact at that level. Eva?
Okay, so what were some of the objectives? And I will say broadly that these objectives do kind of follow the internal, the interpersonal, and then kind of the larger, more macro community organizations, systems. So the first one really is, how can we explore and reflect on our own personal views, right? How does it influence us individually, organizationally, and systematically, kind of us, centering the inner work. The second objective, and again, this is not linear, this unfolds almost simultaneously all the time, but how do we support one another's developing capacities? And I am a developmental psychologist, so I always see things in terms of a developmental continuum. And yes, every single equity champion and all the supervisors, all the leaders in Jumpstart, me and Khadija, we all are on our journey of development. So how do we including me and Khadijah, like we are growing and learning too. How are we supporting each other's developing capacities to explore these issues? How do we encourage deeper conversations? And I think this is also where we talk about the container, the co-creation of a container. How do we warm up our space? What kind of space will we be in? Was just in a really beautiful session just earlier where we talked about psychological safety and what can unfold when a space is safe enough for us to show up courageously, for us to show up in our most authentic selves. And that is also a journey. And don't want to suggest that there's some point of arrival. I think that is always emerging and developing. And then finally, of course, yes, this is also absolutely about our communities. How are we serving them with intention, right? And also exploring how larger systems are impacting our work. Oh, and so yeah, yes, here are some of the themes that came up. And for those of you who have worked with us before, you're going to see a lot of similarities. The first one is critical self-awareness. This is the first one we had a lot of prompts. Who am I and where do I come from? What do I bring into the cultural space of early care and education? And for those of you who tuned in to some of the sessions where Germán Valteros was presenting, he was really the one to introduce this idea of early care and education as a cultural space that exists, and what are we bringing into this cultural space? It's a little bit of a shift in the way that we normally think about our work. The many arcs of being a reflective equity facilitator, and Khadijah, I think we've now expanded our list of arcs to maybe 6 now that have to be considered. So, we have the arc of, within one session, how does our session go? Right. And then you have individuals in that group. Where are individuals in their own arc of development around, talking and exploring issues related to diversity, equity, and inclusion? Then you've got the arc of the group, and here we have this very special group, these equity champions in Miami. Where is this group in their kind of collective understanding? And there are several more, but, this is the many arcs that we would continuously bring up. Rupture and repair, always rupture and repair. I think that's always a theme. Yes. And yes, embodying the consultative stance. Of course, Khadijah is so skillful at weaving in our attention to understanding how the consultative stance shows up in this work. Courageous vulnerability. Yes. What are the processes in early care and education settings? What we didn't talk about yet is the Maite, you did talk about Miami, and you shared with us those statistics. And yes, the early care and education settings are very unique and different. And for me personally, I'm mostly in very binary black and white narratives around this work. And I noticed even in the statistics that were shared about mental health consultation and disparities, and it's still a very binary story. We don't have shades of brown in that story. And so we really wanted to understand more and more and more, like moving away from the black and white binary. What is this story? What are the processes that are unfolding in these settings where it's mostly shades of brown? Those are different dynamics in our society, in these settings. What are we learning about ourselves as a facilitator? And is there one more? Is that it? Ultimately, how do we connect these principles in our day-to-day work? And we don't necessarily always start with the day-to-day work, but sometimes what Khadijah and I are learning is sometimes that is the portal that can get people talking and sharing in ways that then can lead to these deeper issues. So there are many points of entry. And I think a learning point for me is understanding that sometimes when we start off by talking about the concrete, that can be a portal to go to some things that maybe are not as concrete. I don't know that there's one right way to do this. I think a lot of it depends on the group and where they are in their collective development and where the individuals are in their development. And Khadijah, I don't know if there's anything else, like what would you want to say about some of these themes or your reflections on what we explored together?
Please, even just keep going.
Yes. How do we co-create this container? And that is not an easy thing to do, as we all know. Many of us shy away from talking explicitly about race and oppression and power and privilege. And that container is important. All right, Khadija, what were your initial wonderings as we started this work?
Interesting. I hadn't expected the question, so let me take
sorry.
a second to think about. No, not at all.
I can start if that's helpful, because I
Sure, that would be
some
great.
of our
Thank you.
because I remember some of our initial
yes.
Yeah, one was well, the unique makeup of the group, just the cultural makeup of the group, which I kind of talked about already. I was really intrigued by the use of your fidelity documents, that you actually had a document that attempted to capture the integration of diversity, equity, inclusion. I thought that was, for me, it was very clear. The way that you all were setting this up is that this DEI work was not an afterthought. You already had a fidelity tool. You had an interview process for the equity champions. People had to interview for this position, and you paid them. Also, the inclusion, it was so clear. That was so much engagement and buy-in from leadership. I think Khadija and you and I were wondering together, and then with the group, it could go either way. When you have power in the room, we were wondering how that would go. So those were kind of some of our initial wonderings. How will it go to have the leadership in these sessions with the consultants and supervisors? We were curious about that. And I don't know if you'd want to add on, that sparked some.
Just on that last part, yes. Now I'm remembering the initial questions, and questions that I think we all together continue to ponder, but specifically around the inclusion of supervisors, leaders, thinking about the impact of that power differential and the ways in which I feel so much that, at least in the situation with folks at Jumpstart in Miami, that when you embrace, and I generally feel this, that when you embrace and speak to the influence, the potential influence of those power differentials, and make it the responsibility of those of us in positions of power, to be able to initiate conversations that might be sensitive or uncomfortable, that in fact there is much to be gained by the inclusion of supervisors and leaders in the discussions. One, as Mate said, one, that the people who are providing reflective spaces for all of the consultants are those supervisors. And what we hear over and over again is, unless supervisors have done their own self-investigation, unless they are in a position of being able to invite the conversation of equity and liberation and justice into supervisory spaces, supervisees don't feel like they can own that. The other part that feels really important about the inclusion of supervisors is that in this work in general, supervisors not only have power, but stay longer. And so the way in which it often imbues a system with these perspectives, which was the goal at Jumpstart, was to go deeper, to imbue it within not just individuals, but the entire system.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's important. And I guess the thing I would add to that, Khadija, what you just said, is I don't think it's a given that it always goes well when supervisors and leadership are in these spaces. What I learned, how I kind of grew, and what I learned from this unique experience with Jumpstart Miami is I suspect that because it seemed to go well with the supervisors and leadership in the space, this idea of psychological safety. And I wonder also, about quite frankly, the makeup of the leadership. These are all, women who identify as Latina, Latinx. And I wonder also about how the makeup of leadership contributed to a felt sense of safety, but also just a commitment to this issue. And that is not the case in many of our organizations. That is not always the case. So I think it did go well in this instance, but I think one of the reasons why initially we were really wondering about that is because we've seen instances where it absolutely has a chilling effect on what people are able to share when supervisors and leadership are in these spaces. So for this group, it worked. But I think we need to really understand what were those conditions that made this process of including supervisors and leadership, what were the conditions present that made it successful? And I think a lot of it has to do with engagement, the buy-in, and quite frankly, lived experience also of leaders and the supervisors who showed up.
Yeah, thank you for adding that part, Eva. The idea that there's already one power differential, and then if you add to that issues of power related to race, how that compounds and can sometimes be a tipping point in a direction of unhelpfulness, particularly if leaders are not aware of those power differentials. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you both. We invited Emperatriz to join us. As I said before, she's one of our consultants, and she's a lead consultant as well as an equity champion for our team. And we wanted her to share a little bit of her experience with you all and be here to answer any questions that you may have. I also have noticed that a few of our other consultants are also in the audience today. So hopefully they'll be able to also answer any questions you may have. But Empe, can you tell us a little bit about what made you decide to apply to become an equity champion?
Of course, and thank you so much for having me here. So it really all started with curiosity and also reflection from my part. I really reflected about my journey as a consultant, right, for Jumpstart, and I felt like really curious, right, and noticed that I had very limited knowledge about the DEI topic initially. So that's when I decided that this was really an area that I wanted to grow in and learn more about, and ended up applying as an equity champion.
And how did you feel when you were selected?
So this is when I want to be really transparent. I felt really anxious, really anxious initially. And I don't want to sugarcoat that, right? I felt that I was undertaking a huge responsibility. Also felt hesitation as well, because I knew that this meant me stepping out of my comfort zone and starting to bring up the topic with more directors and more teachers in early learning programs. And that is something that, as you mentioned before, throughout the program, we had noticed, including myself, that we struggle with that piece, to bring up those conversations with directors and also teachers. So yes, in a nutshell, that's how I felt initially. I felt a little bit anxious, but ultimately what really calmed my anxiety was also knowing that I wasn't doing this alone. It really does take a village, and I had support from my fellow consultants, from program leadership, from you, Mike, as my reflective supervisor, and also from Ava and Khadija.
Yeah, and I think, thank you for sharing and being honest about your feelings. I think that was a very common feeling from the other equity champions as well. I don't know if you recall that our plan initially was to start the groups with equity champions and supervisors and Eva and Khadija, and simultaneously start the meetings that the equity champions will be running with the rest of the consultants. And it really took us maybe 2-3 months before I think everyone felt ready to start running your own groups. And I think that's a testament to how everyone was feeling and wanting to feel a little bit more secure before you felt comfortable running the groups yourselves. What has it been like for you to participate in the monthly groups?
It has been a great experience. It has been very reflective, very supportive. It also has been a very rewarding experience overall. And I think that one of the main takeaways, right, that I have gotten is just how important it is for me to be grounded and regulated, and for all of us to be grounded and regulated even before engaging in those difficult conversations with participants. But overall, very rewarding experience.
Oh, and can you tell us a little bit about what it's been like to run the groups?
Yes. So this is when I want to talk a little bit about the progression of the group, because initially the group, when I started to run them, they were very hesitant. Same way, Maite, that you just mentioned that it took even us, the equity champions, a little bit of time to warm up. I saw the same thing in the groups that I was running, right? So initially, I noticed that my group in particular was asking for a little bit more structure. And I thought that when I started the group, my initial expectation was that the group was just going to run organically, not that it needed so much structure. So that made me reflect a little bit about, okay, how can I meet my consultants where they're at, and then have patience and progressively learn and collaborate together. And that's exactly what ended up happening. I met them where they were at, initially provided a little bit more structure, and little by little, consultants started to get and feel more and more and more comfortable. And now, fast forward to a couple of months later, we have reached a point where we don't need that structure anymore. And they, even all my consultants, myself included, when we meet on a monthly basis, conversations just happen organically now. So that it's really a testament, right, to the support, and it has really been a collaborative process overall.
That's wonderful to hear. Has this experience impacted you in terms of your work with as a consultant with your clients? Have you noticed a difference?
Definitely. A couple of years back, and I've been with Jumpstart since its inception, I would definitely shy away from these conversations. And if I was in a classroom setting, for example, and I noticed maybe a teacher being biased, right, I wouldn't have said anything at that point, and I would just have kept doing my classroom observation. And now I feel that at least I could take the opportunity, right, to actually engage in those conversations. And that in itself has made the world of a difference, because even with that, I feel like we're planting little by little seeds. And in itself, then it just impacts the whole program as a whole, and also even how the teachers, right, interact with the children, which in essence, that's the whole point of the Jumpstart program too, is building relationships and enhancing connections.
Yeah, and I guess that's the last question is, have you noticed a difference in the short amount of time that we've been going through these groups? Have you noticed any difference in how teachers interact with children?
For sure, 100%. And it starts with self-awareness. I think that as a consultant, I had to be self-aware of my own biases in order for me to then help create that awareness in the teachers and also in the directors. So for sure, 100%, I really have seen an impact in the work, and how when we go back and talk about the parallel process, how that work is also impacting how they interact with the children overall.
Thank you so much. And yeah, that's, like you said, the ultimate goal. So have we made any progress is the next question for us. From clinical observation, supervisors' reports, we have noticed that the topics of culture is being discussed a lot more, reflective supervision, and as Empe mentioned, also in the equity groups that are being run. These topics seem to be addressed more often in consultations, as demonstrated by the consultants' reports, as well as the fidelity videos, which we continue to do and review on a regular basis. Equity champions, supervisors, and other consultants seem to feel more comfortable bringing up cultural topics for reflection and exploration. That's definitely something that we've noticed across the board. Now, what is our next step? And I would say our next step is to have more of a equity impact analysis, a study where we can actually see if it's in fact having an impact on the children. Are our efforts making a difference for children at our centers? Are there differences in how children of color are being disciplined still? Are children of color expelled at higher rates than white children? And this is something that that would, of course, require more of a longitudinal study and something that would require some effort in that part, but definitely something that we want to take as a next step to see if we're having an impact. And here's a picture of our team. Thank you so much. And we have some time for questions.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much. We have a few questions that came in the chat that I'll get started with. Everybody else, feel free to put your questions in. It looks like the first question we had was a thank you. We also had a lot of those. And it says, thank you for facilitating this. Are you able to share the fidelity form utilized by Jumpstart?
Yes, I don't see why not. I think that we can definitely, I will check with Dr. Natali, who is the PI in this project, but I don't see why that would be a problem. And I don't know what the best way of sharing it would be with the conference organizer so that it can be shared with a group.
Absolutely. So if you can share it, they can post it to the conference website.
Perfect.
All right. The next one that we have is, what are some biases that teachers might have of us as consultants? Sure, many.
Okay, that's a good question. And I would defer to some of our consultants. I don't know, MP, if you have any thoughts off the top of your head. I see that we have Myrna, Gladys. I think we have a few of our consultants in the audience as well.
Yes, so one of the biases is that we're experts. So I'll start with that. And that's a huge one, because when we walk in a classroom, automatically they view us as the experts. So we're even trying to deconstruct that from the get-go and avoid that expert role, and really highlight that this is a collaborative process and a reflective process. When we do that, that's when we see consultation really just, become amazing at that point, to be quite honest, and actually makes an impact in the classroom setting and also in the children.
Wonderful. And I know that you mentioned you had a few consultants in the audience. I'm not sure if they're able to take themselves off mute, so please feel free to put your answers in the chat as well. All right, we've got another question from Dr. Neil Horan. Since the outcomes of children are more distal, have you measured at all the impact on the educators receiving consultation? Are you measuring the classroom environment or other aspects that may be impacted by your work?
To this particular topic, we, other than the fidelity and we do pre and post tests, things like that, but I don't know that we are not really collecting anything specific to this DEI effort. So I think that's definitely something that we need to put in place.
Wonderful. All right, just more praise in the chat, as well as somebody saying that they love your name, Emperatriz. Now I got it right, like I did in the practice, and I'm so sorry I bundled it up the first time. But no other questions are coming through. We'll give it another minute. All right. Thank you all so much for an excellent presentation, and thank you for your time and your work. Everybody have a great rest.
Thank you for your help.
Okay.
Thank you for joining us.
Bye, everyone.